Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon if you're calling in from the West Coast or Hawaii. I'm Kim Churches, CEO of the American Association of University Women, AAUW. We're so delighted you're joining us this evening. As we kick off this evening's discussion, we know that entrepreneurship can address historic gaps in opportunities, access to resources, and economic security for people of color and women and other marginalized communities. So we're going to be talking about how entrepreneurship can really drive social justice around some of the most major social issues we're facing as a society. And we also know that even during this pandemic, while so many millions of women and people of color have left the workforce, we have seen a dramatic surge in the creation of new businesses by Black women and Latinas in this country, even with a continued lack of venture capital and investment, and even with increased Small Business Administration help since January 2021. So this is going to be just a terrific conversation. And I particularly want to thank the University of California's Berkeley's Haas School of Business for their support in helping us to set the context for this session. And we'll be kicking this off. I want to make sure that I can introduce our fantastic panelists this evening. And let me get to their bios, because these two women are powerhouses on this subject, and I know I'm going to glean lots of new information from tonight's discussion. First, we have Melanie Ukule. She's the founder and CEO of Minwo, which is a diversity, equity, and inclusion tech company that centralizes Black business development by providing an ecosystem of products and services to help build, grow, and scale Black businesses. Melanie really has spent the majority of her career transforming data to actionable insights. She spent years working for GE, and she now, alongside running Minwo, also works as a business strategy consultant for startups. She has her MBA from the Berkeley Haas School and has a BS in Business Administration and a minor in Engineering and Tech from Georgia Tech. So welcome, Melanie. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. I'm also pleased to introduce Dr. Anastasia Bailey, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Management and Global Business at Rutgers Business School. She finished her PhD at The Ohio State University, where she also became not just an alum of the great institutions where she conducted her research and worked towards her dissertation, but she also earned an AAUW fellowship. So we consider Anastasia part of our AAUW family here as well. Anastasia has worked for Fortune 500 companies like Pfizer, GlaxoSmithKline, Procter & Gamble, and she's taught multiple international business and entrepreneurship courses because her research really leverages different perspectives and theories to help understand the cross-national impacts on the behavior of entrepreneurs. Both of these fantastic women, Melanie and Anastasia, are going to be able to share a lot of information with us tonight of where we are and where we're going with social justice through entrepreneurship. Welcome, Melanie. Welcome, Anastasia. So I mentioned in my opening remarks here, just why entrepreneurship with a social justice lens is so critical and how we can actually build back new norms. We all know that the old norms in the workplaces were not working for millions of human beings in the workforce. And so how entrepreneurship can help us to drive some of the societal changes that we're looking for. And I know you're going to talk a little bit about that, as well as some of the gaps in entrepreneurship tonight. And I want to start, Melanie, with you, if that's okay. And I'll start with you. And then as I mentioned to Anastasia and Melanie, we're really wanting to make this a true conversation. So we feel like we're sitting with all of you in your living rooms or your home offices or out on your decks or front porches on this beautiful, almost fall evening. But I want to start with you, Melanie, to really talk through a little bit about your work, what led you to start Minwo, and what kind of inspired the Minwo business model, and how does it work to address the issues of racial inequality and specific findings that kind of got you going in this work?
Yeah, for sure. Well, first and foremost, thanks for having me. Excited to be here. And, my Minwo journey really started with feeling like I wasn't doing enough. As you read in my bio, I was working for GE at the time. I loved working in the data science space, was doing pretty cool things there. But right around 2015 is when, Black Lives Matters Part 1, as I call it, really kicked off. And I saw what was happening in my community. And for me, I felt like, okay, how is there a way that I can bring my talents and my gifts and my interests into this space and figure out a way to affect change? So that's when the Minwo journey essentially began. And the way that the company is run today and our business model is actually a byproduct of the journey as an entrepreneur. So the first 3 years or so, I always say, I feel like I was hustling backwards. I was working really, really hard and not making any progress. At the time, I was living in Silicon Valley, and I would walk into rooms that were 72% white men. True story. Walked into one room and they said, as white men, we deserve it all. And it's one of those moments out of a movie. But that was just the space. And so for me, it was like, okay, I'm trying to build this business. I know that I'm talented, I'm hardworking, I have skills, but it's difficult, above and beyond the average founder journey. And so now the platform that we're building essentially is a centralized place for business owners to be able to find the programs, resources, capital, what have you, that are looking for them. And I wish it existed when I started my journey.
Kidding. No kidding. I mean, we all, we've heard so many stories. You're right. It's just like out of a movie script, what you heard from those privileged white men.
Yeah.
But that's been going on for decades in Silicon Valley. And I mean, there have been reams and reams of research and articles and stories and practical and policy recommendations to change it. But still, those gaps are just really pervasive. And so kudos to you for really starting just to decide to create a place where you can have really a clearinghouse for all of those resources. So let me just ask a follow-up question on this of how do you measure the impact of your business on really helping to close the racial wealth gap? How are you measuring that impact?
Yeah, so there are a few statistics that we keep in mind as we do this work. Namely, about 4% of Black-owned businesses hire another employee. About 20% of them are tech companies. Less than 1.2% of VC funding go toward Black-owned businesses. And finally, Black-owned businesses are twice as likely to be denied for a business loan. So for us, those are the 4 key metrics that we want to move the needle on. And so we do that by tracking metrics of each business on the platform. We leverage our chatbot to ask questions related to how many employees do you have, what revenue are you making, what field you're in, what industry you're in. And then we periodically check back in to say, all right, a quarter later or a year later, how have things changed?
That's great. And are you seeing an ability to kind of start to create a network among these entrepreneurs? Certainly, maybe not ones that are perhaps in competitive, similar spaces, but just being able to have that peer group of fellow entrepreneurs. Is that part of the model as well?
Yeah. So, I mean, just from my own experience, right? Prior to the accelerators that I went through earlier this year, Techstars and UC Launch, it felt very much like you're out in a desert doing this work. But as soon as you have that cohort of peers that you can work with, ideate with, talk to about the hard realities of being an entrepreneur, it really accelerates how you operate in the space.
No, that's fantastic, Melanie. Thank you so much. And Anastasia, how are you seeing, I mentioned in my opening remarks, this surge of Black and Latina-owned businesses, that you're just seeing huge numbers of new businesses launching through the pandemic, even as we're seeing scores and scores of women leave the traditional workplace, the non-entrepreneurial activities for them, because they're not able to have the work-life blend that they need for caregiving responsibilities, for personal care, all of the things, and taking care of their homes and their lives. So tell me a little bit about in what ways cultural diversity within entrepreneurship fuels kind of this innovation in different sectors and addresses some of the social concerns, the communities they serve, and maybe just what observations you're seeing during the pandemic that kind of prove some of these models.
Okay, so this is a kind of a meaty question and different places I could go in it. I kind of wanted to resonate a little bit with you, Melanie, before I even get into that. I think one of the greatest challenges we have with minority populations, immigrant populations, all of this is kind of the additional burden on top of, there are times where you were qualified fully to do the work, but the additional burden of stereotypes, stigma, aggression, almost is an additional layer that takes so much effort that can discourage folks from really making progress in entrepreneurship. So your story that you share, I resonate with it, and I've heard it before. I think it's really interesting too that you're tracking the data. So, the information, you're trying to understand what's going on with these firms and trying to come back and see a year later, are things changing? I think sometimes there's a disbelief as to what may actually be going on. So it's nice to have more data to show what some of the issues are that's happening. But to kind of hop over to your question about diversity. So diversity is very important for a number of ways for innovation. Two that I can think of off the top of my head is, research shows that with diversity, you need different bits of information to combine to create new ideas. And different bits of information that are, different and not really the same. And so you get that when you have different types of people who are in different social groups are more likely to not share the same information and have access to different bits and pieces of knowledge. And so if you get these different circles, folks from these different pools, knowledge circles and social circles to interact, innovation can happen, because from the natural combination of different bits of information, you can get this innovative process happening. The other important thing about diversity is the cognitive properties, the differences, the different perspectives people can bring to solving a problem. They can think about it in different ways and bring their different perspectives. And so that really helps with, coming up with new ways to solve problems. But regards to specifically some of these social issues that specific communities may be facing, one of the challenges, in order to identify an opportunity, you have to have some type of prior knowledge. And so that can come from exposure to people or information about a group of people that connects with something and that says, there's an opportunity that you identify. And so you have to have some knowledge. And so folks who are outside of certain communities may not understand the issues, the needs of those communities, and it could be more difficult for them to spot, identify, and fill those opportunities. So it's important to have folks within those communities having exposure to entrepreneurship and how to engage in entrepreneurship, because they may see issues and problems and ideas, but they may not know how to go about solving them or who to connect with in order to, kind of figure out how to capitalize or execute on this opportunity. So an example, recently this week, was it this week? I think it was last week, actually. I was listening to pitch presentations from entrepreneurs at NJIT. And one young entrepreneur, he moved from India, and his effort to try to get a credit card here in the US, he realized that there wasn't a service that translates credit history across country borders. And so he was able to identify this opportunity because it was part of his experience. And so now he's trying to create a solution, a firm that will solve this issue and translate these credit background reports. So people who immigrate here and move here, students or workers, or for whatever reason, have the opportunity to, have their credit information available to them so that they can build credit reports. So diversity is important for innovation because you can get bits and different pieces of ideas, different cognitive properties, and also identifying opportunities that may not be readily apparent to folks who are not within those communities.
That's a fantastic example you gave, and one that, I mean, how many times have we heard stories? My husband's family's from Pakistan and India, and they had a certain socioeconomic status while they were there, and then when they came to the U.S., it was like you started completely from ground zero again, and so trying to rebuild that. That's a fantastic example. Exactly. Now, to both of you,
can I just touch on what you just said, talking about the shifts that happen when you cross borders? That's also a key point that happens with regards to the institutional differences. So the things that mattered in your previous country may not matter here. And so you suffer from a lack of knowledge. Then you may also suffer from a lack of legitimacy, because people may not trust your degrees, or, there are stereotypes or nationalism that affects, whether or not people want to work with you. And so diversity is important, not just for the communities, but for all communities, because if you're able to have majority and minority mixing together, you can have the minority populations learning about the knowledge and information and gaining, maybe leveraging some of the legitimacy provided by, folks that are from that local environment, but then folks who are, partnering with these immigrants, they can also get insights into new information, new ways of looking at things, and new ideas that they have, and kind of work together to leverage, these new opportunities.
Yeah, totally. And all of that are the positive sides. And of course, with the growth of xenophobia and nationalism sweeping the globe, it's all the more important that we have these resources at hand so we can break down some of those barriers and biases and make it easier for human beings to pursue their dreams, whatever zip code or nation they're residing in. You're totally right. So, Melanie, I'm going to turn this to you, and this is kind of a big question, and then I'd love to get Anastasia's take on it as well. But I mentioned before, we know that the pandemic, I mean, the never-ending pandemic with its peaks and valleys that we're all still in, and sending all best wishes to you both that you continue to stay safe and stay well. But we know that the pandemic has just set back decades of progress for millions of humans, and particularly for people of color and women in the workplace. So as we're talking so much about building back new norms and what that's going to look like. And there's still a lot of different stimulus packages going out to really spur recovery. I saw today that the stock market was down for a while, but so we'll see how this wild ride that we continue on over the course of the next several months to years. And I do mean this is probably going to be recovery for years of what we've anticipated. But as we look to recovery, and as you think about your work at Minwo and your own experiences, and then the experiences of folks in your community over this past 18 months, what role do you see social entrepreneurship playing for our long-term business models here? How do you think that how social entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship in general can help to really spur a lasting change? And I'll go first to you, Melanie, and then Anastasia, welcome your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I think I'll insert an interesting thought that came to mind when it comes to the pandemic, and specifically how the Black community, or at least the Black business community, is navigating it. I think as a community, the Black community is fairly resistant, right? For a community of people to survive slavery and survive the many different barriers that have been put in our way. I think the pandemic is just another variation of that. And from what I've seen, there have been pockets, not to say that it's across the board, but there have been pockets that have actually found ways to thrive during this time, right? If I think about like recent graduates from my alma mater, Georgia Tech, they've had a chance to get high-paying jobs, six-figure jobs while living at home. One way to close the racial wealth gap that we know exists, right? I was listening to a couple of podcasts about how people are now working multiple jobs at one time to make money to, again, close that racial wealth gap. And then finally, it's forced people to start thinking about investments and retirement and, really taking that seriously, because the way of life that they were familiar with has fundamentally changed. So I found that really interesting. I just love the resilient spirit that I've seen when it comes to that. Now, if I think about, the question that you posed in social entrepreneurship and how we can support all of that, even with my own business, the fact that everything shut down and was pushed virtually gave me access to rooms that I would not have had access to before. When it comes to having to meet with investors, what may have been a barrier, as in flying to New York or flying to Atlanta or flying here and there and not necessarily having the funds as a brand new startup with zero investment, that would have been a lot harder. However, now with Zoom and everyone forcing to be on Zoom, it gave me the opportunity to be in front of just about anybody that I wanted to. And it didn't feel awkward for me. That it tends to be on the introverted side. It didn't feel awkward. I felt like I could still be myself and show up fully. So there's definitely some of that. And then just with the platform where people finding ways to connect digitally, I think there's a lot of opportunity for some of the social impact work to be able to reach more people, to scale faster, because now they're all online.
Great points. Anastasia, please.
Yeah, so right, the pandemic hit the United States, and along with illness and debt and widespread, there was this widespread economic disruption. Businesses were closed, unemployment levels surged to levels that we haven't seen before. But prior to this pandemic happening, if we think about what was going on in the economy with regards to entrepreneurship, we see entrepreneurship at highest levels among Hispanics than Asians. So these minority communities were really engaging in higher rates of entrepreneurship. And when you look at immigrant versus native born folks, immigrant entrepreneurs tend to engage in entrepreneurship at twice the rate of folks who were born here. So it's just a really innovative community. And so with the pandemic hitting, it obviously the folks who are engaging in entrepreneurship, they were hard hit. And it happened for these minority entrepreneurs for two reasons I can think of. One is, hardest their location. Hardest were some of the metropolitan areas where you have more heavy populations. And then also to the industries that minority entrepreneurs tend to be involved in. They're more face-to-face service industries, taxi, daycare, restaurants. So we see the effects of the pandemic being much more significant and impactful on these minority communities. So like you said, many of them are recovering, but some recovered just to hit another, downturn. And then like Melanie was saying, some folks have pivoted and figured out a new business model because of the new rules that we have to play by. And what's also what Kimberly mentioned, what's key is like these incentives and funding and bridge funds that the federal government is trying to roll out. And I think the effects of the pandemic are ongoing. Folks are still dealing with it and trying to make it through this. So while some businesses have recovered, some have declined, some continue to lag. And I think it's going to be a long time. We still have a ways to go because we want to act like the pandemic is over as much as we can and try to push ourselves back into some type of normal. But it really isn't quite over yet. And, businesses continue to try to stay afloat as we try to survive and get back to something normal.
Yeah, it's really, really true. And we've all had to learn, I joke with our AAUW community that if I had said in January 2020 that all of our travel's done, we're just going to do everything on Zoom, there would have been mass riots about that because people were so accustomed to the old way we delivered programs. But we're old dogs learning new tricks in real time and learning how to be more effective so that the idea, exactly as Melanie was saying before, that if you're in Seattle and you have to go to New York to meet with potential investors, that cost and burden was really real in 2019 and early 2020. And now you have opportunities to have meetings where, and the idea of business travel will be fundamentally and permanently changed as to when you're going to be a road warrior and when you're not, and what are those expected costs, and also that you get more access. But this rolling, with where we are right now, I think it's really important that we know, and that everybody that's on the webinar today knows that there are a lot of different stimulus packages. I'll also say what I've been really interested in seeing is new VC funds that are very much targeted towards women and people of color and their startup businesses, still far, far, far below where white males are accessing capital. That said, you are seeing new funds coming up. You're seeing some major philanthropists like Mackenzie Scott and Melinda Gates starting to invest in different ways through VC, and not just through traditional philanthropy as well, but still few and far between. So we've got a long way to go on that front. But Melanie, let me ask you this too, because you've kind of touched on it already, but I think it's important to get through this because as your identity as a Black woman, how is that informing your business decisions, especially those where you're trying to serve the folks within your community in Minpo, and ones that you're really hoping will specifically start to address some of the social causes your business is centered on? How does your identity actually impact how you get up and face that work every day?
Yeah, that's something that, interestingly enough, on a personal level, I had to really get to a point where I am 100% solid and confident in who I am as a person. Because let me tell you, this journey will shake you. It'll shake you left, it'll shake you right. And even down to how I manage my team, right? I have a team of 15, half of them are highly technical developers. And so there was a time where I did not consider myself technical, even though I worked in data science, even though I worked at GE, did not consider myself technical. I had to get rooted and firm in the way that I felt about myself so that I could lead that team, right? Asking the right questions, making sure that they didn't think that they could get over on me as a woman, as a Black woman. There's thought and in how I lead to make sure that, yes, I believe that I lead with like a servant leadership mindset. I don't ask anyone to do anything I wouldn't be willing to do, but sometimes I second guess that. And I think about, the masculine way of leading, right? The take charge, the yelling, and the, putting your foot down. Am I too soft? I don't know, but so far my team likes me, so I think it's working. And then, when it comes to even when I'm approaching people as far as business deals, and just, there's a layer, I was telling a friend about this, there's a layer of assessment that I have to do when working, especially with men, right? Is this an actual business opportunity, or are there underlying thoughts and currents that I have to filter out for, right? Especially being, as a Black woman, hypersexualized historically, I'm constantly aware of how I show up. I tend to lead with my credentials, help them understand, like, this is not for play. I've been doing the work. I have the credentials behind me to help them, get into that mindset. So, there's definitely aspects of it that I carry with me, but now more so from a place of pride. I think there is a very unique intersection between being Black and female, and I think I apply it definitely in every arena.
Very, very well said. Thank you for sharing that, because that extra burden of having to feel like you're wearing all your credentials on your sleeves, and carrying a banner that says I'm worthy, I'm valued, this is real, is an extra burden. Obviously, you should not have to face, but know that you and for far too many have to continue to face it, because it's not setting some old kind of Orwellian idea of what business leaders look like, sound like, and are doing. You're totally right. We have a really interesting question in the chat box here that I want to kind of pose to both of you. And Anastasia, you can jump in first, but I think this is a really important one. We've kind of touched on it, but not to this degree. And the question here is more of, would love to hear your reflections on the nuance between broad-based success for people of color or immigrant entrepreneurs overall, compared to kind of breakthrough type successes that folks point to, so we can pretend things are fine and that racism is over, right? And this gentleman is writing in and wondering about things like model minority or Obama was president, so racism is over type of stuff in the entrepreneurship world. And wonder if you can talk to that of kind of where we get to with broad-based success and just those one-offs where we see and then folks wanting to believe that we don't still have to deal with structural racism in our society.
That is a heavy question. And I think these are the folks that we have to convince. And I think it gets back to Melanie's point about, this data. I mean, collecting the data and showing the data, even if with sharing the information that, I have anecdotally talked to many, many minority entrepreneurs, and the stories about funding issues and how difficult it is for funding is just tremendous. I know it's difficult for everyone to get funding, but it is especially a challenge. And it's the reality is it's not something folks are making up. And the fact that they're kind of being gaslighted, I guess that's the word, the buzzword, that they're saying that everybody has these issues, so you're not special or unique. I think it's a disservice. It's untrue, and it's wonderful that there are folks and opportunities that come together, and you have successes that we can point to, and we can celebrate. But it's not the statistics of where we need to be in terms of equity, and not, like you were saying, the broad-based stats are not where they need to be in terms of equality. That's all I can say.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it is a really, really heavy topic. And as we're looking at the demography in this country, we know demographers have been writing for the past 25 years about the changing demography. And so this is where, where we have to look at new norms and make sure that we are quantifying and qualifying the data here in a way that we can really showcase the areas where we are moving forward, and the areas, sadly, where we're seeing rollbacks over this past 18 months as well. And that we can't just stick our heads back in the sand and pretend everything is okay. There's still a lot of work to do around systemic and structural racism in every part of our society, including in entrepreneurship. So let me ask, I'm going to go back to the questions here that are posed, if that's okay. And I don't know, Melanie, do you want to add on to what Anastasia?
I just wanted to add one piece. It's interesting in the VC, especially funding world. Those breakthrough successors are actually necessary for the rest of the ships or the boats to be lifted. When VCs are looking at a company and evaluating them, the first thing that they do is pattern match, right? Where have I seen this kind of success before? And so for better or for worse, we need more of them to show and be those templates that they can say, oh, I remember X, Y, and Z, they were successful, so maybe I can apply it here. So that's just the additional point I wanted to add.
It's a great point. On that, are you both, I mean, as we're looking at and seeing, I mean, certainly with what I'm calling the Greek letter variants that just I seem to open up my news feed at 2 a.m. And see yet new ones popping up around the globe, and that uncertainty and just the fear we're all in. We've been faced with emotional, mental, and physical traumas over the past 18 months in myriad of ways around the pandemic and in dealing with so much else. But are you both, as we're talking about the role of social justice entrepreneurship here, are you both bullish or bearish on the opportunities for the future? Please say bullish.
I think one of the great catalysts for innovation is shifts in disruption. And I think though COVID is disruptive, there has been lots of innovation that has been happening. There's new ways of how businesses operate. It's created some opportunities, like Melanie anecdotally was sharing, her ability to get access and maybe go to places that were a little bit more difficult to get access to. So for me, based on theory, the fact that there has been some disruption in our economy, there is going to be, I'm looking forward to some really exciting shifts that they're already happening for the way people work. I'm curious to see, I mean, for entrepreneurs, it's one thing, but then also for corporate, more folks thinking about how they want to live their lives, and maybe thinking about entrepreneurship, and then just in general, the fact that there's been so much disruption, all the breaks in how things are normally done needing to be fixed, creates a lot of opportunity for entrepreneurs to fill those gaps.
Great. Go ahead, Melanie.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm on the bullish side. I think with the pandemic, what we saw last year, especially with what I call Black Lives Matter Part 2, that would not have happened if everyone was not sitting at home and really having a personal reckoning, right? The gaslighting that Anastasia mentioned earlier, that Black folks in the United States have been feeling, in that there's something wrong, there's something structurally wrong, it finally made light, right? And so I think there's going to be just more of that in the old world. The normal that people are rushing to get back to was not it, right? When it comes to work-life balance, when it comes to systemic racism, when it comes to a lot of different things, personal wellness, all of that, that's not the normal we should be rushing back to. And I think with this pandemic, all of the negative things aside, people are really starting to advocate for themselves, to recognize that there is a new normal that can, be better for you as an individual, as, better for your business. And I think now that people recognize that, wait, things can change if you want them to change, we'll just see more of that. I don't see people going back to, working 80 hours a week just for the heck of it. I don't see people going back to dealing with, microaggressions in the workplace just for the heck of it. I definitely see, people keep continuing the momentum that was started with this.
Yeah, and certainly there's enough articles being written on what's deemed, and so the Great Recession, the Great Resignation that you're seeing of so many people who maybe have dreamt about becoming entrepreneurs, but are really finding this opportunity now because they may have intergenerational issues, where if you've got baby boomers, older Gen Xers who are accustomed for 20, 30 years of using the old normal, wanting to rush everybody back to the office, and realizing that Dolly Parton 9 to 5 song ain't that appealing anymore, and really looking at new opportunities of how to have that blend so you can have a more fulfilling life. And likewise, and I think this is something I'd like to challenge to everybody participating in tonight's webinars too, is our own, even if you're not an entrepreneur, your own social responsibility of, where are you opening up your wallet, and with what businesses are you supporting? How do you find businesses that are already addressing some of these social needs? How do you know who the owners are and what their mission and goals are for their business? How we can better support women and minority business leaders and minority-owned businesses? And really support these economic security efforts. And there's so many ways we can do this. I mean, I'm not an entrepreneur, but I have an entrepreneurial way of working in the nonprofit sector. But it comes down to even just how I'm spending money in my own household, and where I'm choosing to shop and not shop for different things, so that we can all be part of the social change that we're desiring, and building back in a way that supports everyone. And I think this is a big question of how we were surviving before and how we want to thrive moving forward in every sector, including in the entrepreneurial one. We do have
add something to that. You were talking about the things that folks can do, and it's like, you always think about like open your wallet, right? These are like the money. I think also too, just from listening to the conversation today, Melanie talking about the intellectual work or the burden, that piece of it also, I think that has to do with just how our society treats each other and how we interact with each other. And I think a big shift that's still kind of yet to happen is, can you really dismantle structural racism? I don't know, but can you we have the conversations about being an ally, and really starting to shift the fabric of how we think about who we value in our society. And I think that's really difficult work that I don't know how. There's all the like Melanie pointed out, I love that it's been brought to light, and the organizations are clamoring for and asking for help on how to do and how to address these issues. And it's it went from being like the ugly little stepchild that you maybe try to justify somehow because it might be good for your bottom line, to really trying to care about just equity as the right thing to do. And I think that's something that I don't know how long I don't think that'll happen in my lifetime.
No, it can't possibly, right? Because we're talking about 400 plus years of racism, and systemic change is certainly not going to be a toggle switch that any one of us can just turn the lights on and it all goes away. It is, though, work that each step, each day, decisions we make, it can be on part of that journey. But you're right, in our lifetime, sadly, likely not. But what are the individual things we can be doing to be active listeners and be engaging in this work every day? That's a responsibility for every single human being in our society, for sure. We do have a couple more questions, and I just remind everybody who's participating tonight that go ahead and throw them in the Q&A box in the bottom right here if you've got some. And there are a couple questions that Melanie, I think one you might be able to talk to through Minwo of what you're doing in your own work. But somebody's written in here about how government incentives for small businesses seem really, really complicated to access. No kidding. Even when you are going through SBA, the Small Business Administration, or going through Small Business Development Centers, SBDCs, or going through particular networks like women business owners organizations and the like. And the question here is, like, without having an insider's guidance, are there groups that can help navigate these processes? And I'd love it, Melanie, if you can touch on that a little bit too, and Anastasia, any advice you have as well.
Yeah, for sure. And so my head goes in many different places. For me personally, what we used was this company called Bluevine. It's a fintech company, really helped us, seamlessly with the PPP loan process. And that's, what excites me about technology, is that they are looking for ways to support this work. I know minority-owned businesses, especially Black-owned businesses, were hit pretty hard when it comes to getting loans, especially during the pandemic, because it required a lot of paperwork that a lot of us just don't have, right? If you don't have an accountant, you probably don't have the financial statements and the ledgers that you need to submit to be able to get that loan. If you haven't worked with an HR consultant, or if you're not paying yourself an actual salary, you don't have the Schedule C that you need to be able to submit and receive those loans as well. So definitely feel that pain point. Now, as far as the tactical advice, I'd have to know a little bit more about where you are geographically. I know there's the Minority Business Development Association in most cities that can help with that. SCORE is a great organization that does a lot of business development support. There is the SBA, like you mentioned, has, some groups. There's actually another platform called Eureka that's done some work in this space for tactical business consulting. But like I mentioned, I can list a few, but it won't matter if geographically they don't make sense for you. So feel free to reach out and I can answer that offline.
Thanks, Melanie. Really appreciate that. I'm so glad you brought up a few of those that I'm just nodding like a bobblehead here, because those are some great, great groups doing a lot of work to help entrepreneurs get through this, because it can feel thorny if you don't know where to turn and where those resources are. And a Google search isn't always going to bring up the best opportunities for you. So really those networks can help so much. Anastasia, any thoughts?
That's exactly what I was just about to say. The networking. It's don't stay in a silo. Networking is so important because you want those diverse people who are different than you, who have access to information that you don't have. So it's from a more general theoretical perspective, it's good to go to incubators and go through accelerators and go to learn about these different programs, because the access to information, if you stay within your own community or your own little circle, you may not you may get some certain types of resources, but it's beneficial to get outside of your own circle to get access to different things that, you know, your own community may not bring to you.
Yeah, yeah. Really, really well put. Really well put. So we were talking a little bit before about the breakthrough or the like around racism, and this is kind of an interesting observation of different lived experiences. One individual wrote in that the extra burden you talk about being minority, why is that even felt to this day? This person never felt it when they moved from India. And so why, and this is a lot of this is the different lived experiences and with whom we're engaging in this journey to become entrepreneurs, that not all lived experiences are the same. And we've got to make sure we're meeting people where they are and hearing their own lived experiences. So that's one, but there are a couple more questions here about, actually, this is kind of interesting, Melanie, and I want to put this to you. Somebody's written in, did you have the spirit of entrepreneurship within your family from the beginning, or did the interest come from schooling or from mentors? Was it just born into you, that drive? And where did it come from for you?
So I think overall, I have a spirit of rebellion. And so my mom reminds me quite frequently that I just was not happy living in the confines of corporate America and working for people that I may have respected or not respected, and just wanting to do my own thing. That has been innate in me since I was young. I've always been the one that there's a better way to do this. Why not just do this? But you know, to give credit, my father has spent time building businesses, working on the continent. He was in telecommunications for a while. I was too young and too far removed to really understand or know what that even meant. I just knew that he was in Africa doing work. And so I think maybe partially is, you know, DNA ingrained in me from that perspective, but also just I'm a rebel with and without a cause. I don't like seeing things that don't make sense. And, you know, I live by, if not me, then who, if not now, then when.
I love it. That's really, really powerful. Thanks, Melanie. Anastasia, how in your scholarship and in your research, what drove you to have this interest in entrepreneurship overall?
Okay, so before I tell you that story, I just want to tell anyone out there who thinks that they might want to try entrepreneurship, but it's not hereditary for them. Don't worry, it's a skill. Okay, it can be learned. It can be taught. And anyone, introverts or extroverts, all these different people, all different ages, if you look at a distribution, there's people from every category of ages in this. There's men and women. I mean, men more so than women because of, we know the history here. But anyone can do this, anyone with an opportunity. But there are, you know, a few things that make it possible for you to pursue it, right? You know, do you have funding? But you can, you know, get funding. You can learn how to get funding. You can learn how to put a business plan together. You can learn how to create a value proposition. But really, it's folks that tend to go pursue an idea. It's because they saw something that was a problem and they felt that they can fix it. There was a disruption. There was a change. There was a shift. They could do something better, faster, or cheaper. And then they pulled the resources together and went for it. So my interest in entrepreneurship comes from my background where I grew up in Trinidad, and back in that island, my family were, I guess, subsistence farmers and had their own businesses. They would sell things in the market. My grandmother had a taxi service that she ran out from under the house. My uncle, he had a machine shop that he would do. So I grew up around everybody being at home but making money. But then when I migrated to the United States, and my mom, with her idea of how to make money, tried to do things in America to make money, she faced a lot of difficulty and challenges. And so when I moved here, my family history or background moved from being entrepreneurs to more like we work for a company, work for an organization in order to make money. And so that spurred my interest in what are some of the differences that happens when an individual crosses from one border to another, one country into another. What is it that affects what they can do with regards to entrepreneurship? And so that's what I studied.
What a great story. Thanks so much for sharing that. And it's really relevant to what you shared in the very beginning of our conversation and all of the threads all the way through. Thank you so much to you both. We just have a couple more minutes. I do also want to, as we go back to the Q&A here, also want to encourage anybody on, and we are recording this tonight. It will be available in about 3 to 5 business days on our website as well, in case you missed some of the great tidbits and want to reflect more on what Anastasia and Melanie have been sharing with us tonight. But also want to encourage you to go to the University of California, Berkeley Haas School of Business's website. Their Center for Equity, Gender, and Leadership has a lot of great information on entrepreneurship as well. Lots of tools and resources there too, including some of the ones that Melanie threw into the chat box for us and was talking through earlier today too. So we do have a couple questions out there, and these are really specific ones, really about an interest in accessing some of those resources. So somebody has written in too, for communities where generational wealth and credit history are barriers to financing, what are the options other than the good old-fashioned angel investor when they're coming, few and far between? So I would love any thoughts you both have there.
Yeah, 2 organizations that come to mind. First is Fund Black Founders. Their goal is to be the friends and family around, support you in trying to get that first set of capital. It's a crowdfunding platform. Check them out. And then Black Girl Ventures is another. They've done this pitch competition style way of fundraising where the crowd can actually contribute to the funds that you raise. So those are definitely 2 when you're trying to get off the ground. But for me, it really was just pitch competitions. Really, just starting with, hey, pitching my business, talking about my business over and over and over and over again. It gets you to a place where you can finally speak about it in 90 seconds without it being long and drawn out. A lot of them provide you with funding that is non-equity based, so free cash essentially. And then there are grants that are coming around all the time. Again, it's specific to your area, but also with COVID, things are kind of a little bit more national now. So hopefully that helps.
That's great. Anastasia, any additional thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think Melanie, that's what I was thinking, friends and family and just pitching, finding out about, organizations and networking, also trying to meet people. If you're finding you can't get funding with the group of people you already know, you got to start networking and meeting other people and networking, doing what Melanie is saying, having your 90-second, 60-second, pitches, and then hopefully getting into some spaces where you're actually pitching for money.
Yeah, perfectly put. And, and the only addition I'll add is some of the major financial institutions have really had their own racial reckoning moments over the past few years of really realizing where their investments are going and are opening up, particularly for Black and Brown-led businesses. So there are opportunities, even with giant banks these days, that maybe were not there in the past. And so do continue to explore all the traditional and the non-traditional avenues that you've just heard a little bit about tonight. As we close out tonight, I've really, really gleaned a lot of information from you both, and so grateful, Melanie, to you, and to you, Anastasia, for joining us tonight and sharing some of your insights and your experiences during this time. But as we kind of know that people of color in entrepreneurship, immigrants in entrepreneurship, are going to be some of the strongest factors for the U.S. To really continue to grow economically, as we hope we can see the light on the end of the horizon here for the end of COVID. As we look to that post-pandemic future, anything else you want to say in how we can center these entrepreneurs and our plans for the future? Any other points of wisdom either of you want to share in closing as we look to economic recovery and really bolstering entrepreneurship in these efforts?
I think the one comment that I will add at this point is just to not look at diversity as a monolith. You would be surprised that I would be saying that. But sometimes I think that we think, oh, diversity is just like this one big thing. But just remembering that groups that have labels aren't all the same, and that what's diverse is not just that they're in that group, but that the people within those groups have different thoughts and ideas as well. And that is also part of the treasure of diversity. And it's not just this big bucket that diversity and like everything and everybody and everyone that's, you know, just kind of goes in there. So that's one thing to keep in mind. When you really think about diversity, remember that it's not just one big bucket that everybody falls into that, but within that bucket, there's thoughts and different, you know, differences that exist within those groups.
Absolutely. Just like as we've seen in elections, not all humans that belong to a group or several groups vote the exact same way. We all have many different individual lived experiences. So you're absolutely right, Anastasia. A good reminder. Melanie, any closing comments here? And I also just want to express all best wishes to you for continued growth with Minwo. I think what you're aiming to achieve is incredibly admirable and very, very needed in the sector. But any closing comments?
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think what I leave everyone with is, for me, inclusion starts with asking questions and then digesting the answer. There's a reason why the virtual world works for diverse populations. There's a reason why diverse populations don't necessarily want to go back into the office and experience those same microaggressions they experienced before. Instead of trying to fit, you know, a square peg into a round circle, or however the phrase goes, understand, you know, what are their hesitations and reservations, and why did the normal of old not work for them? It's really an opportunity, whether it's corporate America or entrepreneurs, it's really an opportunity to fundamentally change how we operate. So ask questions, digest the answer, act on it.
Incredibly well put. Thank you so much, Melanie. Thank you to you, Anastasia, as well, for joining us. And special thanks to the Berkeley Haas School as well for helping to support this important conversation, as we're all aiming to ensure social change happens. And we know the role that entrepreneurship will have in that. Would like you to know that if you've got any questions or feedback about tonight's webinar or future webinars, you can always access them on our website. This is recorded, as I said. It'll be up in about 3 to 5 business days up on our website if you want to reflect back on this conversation or look back on previous substantive webinars as well on a whole score of different issues as well. Please do take a look at our website at www.aauw.org. And if you've got any other feedback about this or have ideas for future webinar topics, please contact my dear friend and colleague, Tremaine Parquet, at parquet@aauw.org. And with that, I will say to you both, thank you for joining us. Really a pleasure to get to know you both. Please stay well, stay safe, and I do hope we get an opportunity to meet in person one day, but I also know how wonderful it is that we're able to join together to talk about this important topic tonight. So I thank you all, bid you a good evening.
Thank you for having me, my pleasure. Nice to meet you.
Good night.